Afternoon, welcome to Glendale City Council Workshop Session of November 10th, 2020. This meeting is called to order. We'll conduct a roll call attendance. If you're present, please say you're present. Councilmember Aldama.
Present.
Councilmember Hugh.
Here.
Councilmember Hugh.
I'm here.
Well, we're just making sure you're here twice. Councilmember Clark.
Here.
Councilmember Tomachoff.
Here.
Councilmember Turner. Vice Mayor.
Present.
Okay, I'm present. Councilmember Turner is not present. Okay, moving on. We do have a quorum, so if we could just go ahead and go right into item number 1, please. Ms. Bauer.
Presentation on the city's procurement policy and procedures.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the council. Here to provide a staff report today on item number 1. It'll be led by our Assistant City Manager, Vicki Rihos, and she'll be joined by Lisette Camacho and Connie Schneider.
Thank you, Mayor, Mr. Phelps. Today we're here to talk about the city's procurement policy, and this is kind of a high-level refresher. I know council is pretty familiar with this policy. It is not counting, we're not going to talk today about Title 34 projects, only goods and services that we procure through our main procurement policy. Title 34 is for construction and architectural services and things like that. So that's kind of a separate policy, so we're not going to really include that in this presentation. And then we want to talk with the council about several initiatives that procurement has been undertaking over the last couple of years, and then just open it up for discussion. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Camacho, and she's going to kick us off.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the council. Before I start, I'd like to introduce Ms. Connie Schneider. She's sitting to the left of me. She's our city procurement administrator. The city's procurement policy is governed by the Arizona Procurement Code of the Arizona Revised Statute. Also with the section on contracts within the city charter, the purchasing procedures that's outlined in the city code. Procurements using federal grants are governed by the Office of Management and Budgets, or the OMB Uniform Guidance. This is basically just a set of rules and guidance for the use of federal awards. The city also has 2 administrative policies. The first one is the contractual document review, processing, signature, and filing requirement. This policy is administered by the city attorney's office. The second one is the Finance Administrative Policy number 1, which is the city's procurement policy and procedures. Just a brief history on how the Finance Administrative Policy number 1 came about. It goes back in 2015, and when Ms. Rios and I started here at the city about 7 years ago, the city didn't have any comprehensive policy that followed the state statute, the city charter, and the city code. This led to a lot of inconsistencies in how the departments interpreted the various policies. So back in October of 2015, Ms. Rios and our procurement administrator at the time presented a report to the city council on implementing and putting in place a comprehensive policy that consolidated the city charter, the city code, and the state statute in one document that would make the procurement process more efficient and easier for users to understand. At that time, we also put in various procedures like contract monitoring and monitoring vendor spend and P-card transactions so that we can monitor the procurement methods that departments are using. The next slide is on the...
Mayor, since you're on the previous slide, let me say that I had no problem finding the relevant Arizona Revised Statutes, the city charter, the city code. However, I could not find anything on our website for city administrative policies number 4 or finance administrative policies number 1. And this was adopted while I was off council, so I'm not familiar with either one of them. I have no idea what they say. So I would appreciate receiving a copy of both of those policies.
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Clark, yes, we can certainly send you a copy of the policies. The procurement methods you're seeing on this slide are informal procurements. The informal procurements are contained in the City Code under Chapter 2, Article 5, Division 2, Section 2-146. Informal procurements are procurements that are less than $50,000. The small dollar purchases that are less than $5,000. Usually the buyers are looking for the best value and no selection process is required. The buyers are required to perform due diligence, and it's recommended that the buyers use their P card to use for small purchases. Informal procurements require verbal or written quotes. For purchases that are $5,000 but less than $10,000, a verbal or written quotes is required. The verbal quotes must still be documented by the buyer receiving the quotes. For informal purchases that are $10,000 but less than $50,000, 3 written quotes are required. For the informal procurements, they could be a multi-year contract as long as they don't exceed the threshold for the formal procurements. Formal procurements are purchases that are $50,000 or more. It's under the City Code, under Chapter 2, Article 5, Division 2, Section 2-145. Formal procurements must be advertised in a newspaper at least 14 days prior to the due date of the proposals. You could use an invitation for bid or an IFP or a request for proposal, an RFP. IFPs are usually used to purchase commodities, and usually they're evaluated by price only. The RFPs, or the requests for proposals, they're used for purchases of services and commodities. We have an evaluation committee comprising of 3 to 7 members, and at least one of the member must be from another department. Each evaluator must also confirm that they have no conflict of interest prior to receiving the bids. And the members arrive at a consensus score when they're determining the vendor that will move forward for the notice of intent to award. Sole source and special procurements, again, are also governed by the City Code. Sole source procurements is used when competition is not available and there's only one known source for the supply or the service. We also require a sole source letter from the vendor, and Connie Schneider will talk more about GovSpend, but we also use a system or a tool to verify that the vendors are truly a sole source, even though they've sent us the letter. Special procurements usually have one or more available sources, so you have more than one vendor. It's used when competition is not practicable and could also require a contract and can be for multiple years, but anything that's over $50,000 or more requires council's approval. Emergency procurements are used when the health and safety or welfare of the public is endangered if immediate or preventative action is not taken. Again, anything that's $50,000 or more would require approval from the City Council. Regardless of the procurement methods that is used, the buyers may not artificially subdivide a procurement by dividing up the scope, by dividing up the time, by dividing up the amount, and by dividing up the vendors. An example of dividing up the scope is, for example, we hire a contractor to analyze the impact of the COVID-19, and we're obtaining their services for the analysis and also for creating a report. If the analysis portion costs $30,000 and the reporting portion costs $25,000, you can't divide up the 2 services into 2 different procurements so that you can stay under the formal procurement threshold. So the total cost for that example would have been $55,000. That should go through the formal procurement process. For dividing up the time, an example would be a financial auditor. Just making up the dollars here. If we need an audit of our financial statements every year for 5 years, and that audit costs about $10,000 each year, I can't just go ahead and select the vendor on an annual basis. usually the spend, the 50,000 for threshold for the formal procurement process, is based on the total contract term. So if the term is for 5 years, it's 10,000 a year, then that procurement should go through the formal procurement method. Same thing for dividing up the amount. If you're purchasing a refrigerator, 5 refrigerator for about $1,200 a piece, you can't go through 5 different stores like Home Depot, Lowe's, Spencer's, so that you don't do the written quote. So for this example, it's 5,000 times 12, so it's 6,000, then a verbal or written quotes is required, even though this is an informal purchase procedure. By dividing up the vendors, it's the same thing. If you're trying to obtain copper and you're purchasing it from one vendor, you can't do 3 or 4 different vendors so that you are below the threshold of the 50,000 for the formal procurement method. Protests are also under the city code in the section for formal purchase procedure. Protest only applies to formal procurement, so they would only apply to invitation for bid or a request for proposal. Protests are very uncommon. Generally, we receive about 1 protest a year. And the protest can be for any aspect of a solicitation, but it must be for a valid reason. The protest must be submitted to the city in writing, and it must be filed within 7 calendar days of the notice of intent to award has been issued.
Mayor?
Go ahead.
Would you define or explain who decides what's a valid reason?
Mayor, members of the council, the valid reason would be based on what is outlined in the RFP. So,
Who decides that, whether an item is valid or not?
Mayor, members of the council, the determination for the protest is reviewed by the materials manager and also the city attorney's office.
Okay, so the same person that awarded the original bid is now charged with determining whether the protest is valid or not. Is that correct?
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Clark, the evaluation panel determines and award the bid, and the award is not final until the city council approves that contract. So essentially, the city council awards the contract, but if there is a protest, the materials manager is not part of the evaluation component of the formal
But
procurement.
it does go next to the materials manager or the director of procurement, who then makes the final recommendation, correct? Once the panel decides, the city council does not get a recommendation from the panel. We get a recommendation from whomever is the supervisor of that department, correct?
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Clark, yes, that's what it states in the city code.
Yes, I know. So the evaluation and the recommendation go through the director, who again, or whomever the supervisor is, who then determines whether a protest is valid or not, correct?
Mayor, members of council, that's not correct. So the notice of intent to award is issued by the staff and procurement. The director is the one that usually brings those contracts forward to the council. That's the director of the department that was doing the procurement, say engineering department or city manager's office. The materials manager, at this point in time, the materials manager has been designated as Lisette, and she reviews those. So it's not the same director as the department. That's her role that she's been designated as the materials manager. And it's just the first level of review. So she works closely with the city attorney's office first to determine, is it a valid reason for a protest? A vendor cannot protest just because they don't like the outcome. They have to have a reason that they believe that something was improper, it was scored improperly, something of that nature. And so the entire procurement file is then opened up and reviewed by the materials manager and the city attorney's office together to determine, number one, is it a valid protest? And then number two, what is going to be the response in that protest? So that they together prepare whether they're going to uphold the protest, whether they're going to deny the protest. Again, that's normally, in this case, Lisette working with one of the attorneys in the city attorney's office.
Okay. Has anyone considered at this step having an independent review not associated with the city?
Mayor, members of the council, we have not. The duties and responsibilities of the materials manager are outlined in the city code that way, and so that's just what we follow. You'll see on the next slide when we go to a hearing, we have updated that to say, to change it a little bit. So the second level of review, if that vendor then is not satisfied with their outcome of the protest, they can request a hearing, and Lisette's going to talk about that in a minute, and that couldn't be an independent
Is it an independent, I heard you say could be, but is it an independent person?
It can be, and so it can also not be, but that's
Why is
the
it
way we
not
set it up.
required to be an independent person?
It wasn't required, it's never been required to be. That would be a change in policy if it's required to be. What we did in this case is change it so that it could be a formal hearing officer, which it always could have been, and then remove it from the materials manager to a higher level. So we made it possible that the city manager, one of the assistant city managers, or one of the deputy city managers could hear the hearing. Normally,
But that's, excuse me for interrupting, but that's still within the city. Let me just say this, and you don't have to explain any further because I know what you're going to say. But code can always be amended, can it not? So there could be a requirement that the hearing officer be independent. That could be amended within code, couldn't it?
Mayor, members of the council, it isn't specified now who the hearing officer could be. It could be specified, certainly, if that's.
Thank you.
Mr. Phelps?
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Clark, I believe our procurement process gets very close review, both internally and with our city attorney in his office. I'm trying to identify what the problem is. I mean, we try to have an efficient system for procurement. I would think that us as the person asking for services, we would be in the best position to understand the complexity of a procurement. That would be very difficult, I believe, for an outside person. We've got multiple steps of appeal, which we're going to be talking about here with the hearing. But by and large, I think our procurement team has the appropriate safeguards and firewalls in place. And with, I don't know how many procurements we do annually, but the number of times when we have a complaint by one of our vendors is incredibly small based on the number of procurements that we do. But again, if you want to change the system and allow an outside person to rule what we think is in our best interest on a procurement, we can certainly have those discussions, but that wouldn't be my recommendation.
Yeah, Mr. Turner? Microphone.
Thank you, Mayor. So to follow up on Councilmember Clark's line of questions, are we aware of any cities that would be peer to us, either local or elsewhere, that use an outside arbiter when there's a hearing?
Mayor, members of the council, this policy very closely follows the policies of other cities. It was actually mirrored most closely to the city of Scottsdale's policies, and then took into account, again, our own charter, our own codes, and the state statute. I'm not aware of any other city that requires that it be an outside hearing officer. Most of the policies, and this is the way this policy is written, is that it's one of these people, so the city manager, the assistant city manager, or deputy city manager, and their designee. So essentially, it would come to the city manager's office's attention, And then we would decide, do we think that we should handle it in-house, or do we think that we should get an outside person to do it, a formal hearing officer? If it's a very complex situation, we have hired hearing officers for multiple reasons. We've had them also for licensing cases, for example, when there was a problem with someone's business license and they requested some type of hearing. If it's complicated and we think that it warrants it, we will outsource those to a hearing officer. If it isn't and we have the expertise in-house, then we can, it's basically at the option to leave it in-house.
I may, so in there somewhere I think I heard you say that you weren't aware of other cities that, as a matter of course, send it out.
That's correct. I'm not
Thank
aware of
you.
any.
And the third bullet point on the previous slide and what our city manager just related to us is that these protests are very uncommon. They're not something that happens so often that dealing with them would be, changing how we deal with them would be necessarily burdensome. We had a situation arise fairly recently, and I guess my consternation was that the contract in question came to the council for approval, and the council was not aware that there had been a protest filed in regards to it and or how that protest was handled and the facts around it. So it delayed the ultimate awarding of that bid significantly, and it somewhat jeopardized the program it was related to, and in other situations might have more seriously jeopardized it. It required us to have a special meeting to get through it all. So what I would request is that if a protest has been filed, whether it's handled by the materials manager and the city attorney's office, or if it goes on appeal to a higher level within or without the city, I would like the city council to be made aware of that in the staff report at least that comes to us prior to our voting on it.
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Turner, thank you for bringing that up. Actually, that was, I think from our perspective, made very clear during the procurement for the holiday lights, and we've already implemented that change internally. So we'll make it very clear that anything we bring to you, even if it's gone all the way through the hearing process, we will indicate in our staff report to the council that the initial bid had a protest on it, and then provide as much information so that when you do vote on it, you feel like the outcome has been was appropriate.
Okay,
Mayor?
go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Can I ask Mr. Phelps, has that been, the change in policy been formally adopted? Because everybody who's here understands that that's but I mean, so that we actually memorialize it, so going forward that's the established process for the city.
I'll let staff answer. I believe it has been.
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Tolmachev, yes, we have implemented that process.
But I mean, Mayor, you cited several procurement policies, so I'm asking, has that been adopted into the formal policy, that is a step that if there has been a protest, that's the council's notified?
Mayor, members of the council, we haven't put that in writing into that policy, but we certainly can do that. We can add that. We just have to find the right place to add it in there, but we'll give it some
Yeah,
thought.
and I mean, I don't mean that to criticize, but
No,
I'm just saying going forward, by putting that actually in writing, it clarifies that that's what the intention is. Another council can always undo that if they want to, but I would like to see that, basically put into the policy.
We'll work with Michael, Mr. Bailey's office to determine where's the best place to put that.
Thank you.
Continuing on.
Just wanted to add that a determination for a protest must be issued within 14 days, 14 business days. Moving on to hearings, the hearing request must be in writing and received no later than 7 business days after the written determination. The hearing must be held within 60 days after the hearing request is received. The hearing can be conducted by a formal hearing officer or the city manager, assistant city manager, or deputy city manager. As part of the process of the hearing, it is recorded, and the official records of the hearing is maintained by the city clerk's office. The vendor does have the burden of proving the city has acted in an arbitrary and capricious or inconsistent manner. And the final decision of the hearing officer must be sent to all parties within 20 calendar days after the conclusion of the hearing. And with that, I'll turn over the presentation to Ms. Schneider.
Ms. Camacho. So procurement is working on a lot of initiatives right now. The first one for the local minority and women-owned businesses, all of these are ongoing actually, but the Finance Administrative Policy number 1, Section 603, states that departments are required to search for minority-owned businesses that can offer the product or service that they are searching for. And these are for procurements that are over 5,000 and less than 50,000. As a best practice, the department should always go to these sites to search for vendors who can supply their commodity or service.
Mayor? Thank you, Mayor. It's good to know that, and I know that this practice, if you will, has existed with the city and other municipalities. However, how do we know? So who's reviewing or who's enforcing that any procurement from any department or any individual that's creating requisitions for product or services is actually going through local first? There's a lot of materials that are being sold here in Glendale that we procure. So who's overseeing that? Is there a list that we can look at that we're actually doing that?
So, Mayor, members of the council, I want to clarify just one thing first, and that is that we actually cannot, by law, create a local preference for Glendale vendors. There was a case out of, I believe, Tucson, and Tucson had that in their city code, and it was taken away from them by the courts. They had to repeal that particular ordinance. However, having said that, we do our best, and we have it written in the code that, or in the practices that this is what buyers should do. This is a challenge for us, though, as you said. You know, how do we keep track of what each individual buyer is doing and make sure that they've reached out to a minority and women-owned businesses? There are lists of them. They are identified on when we go to the state procurement website to look for potential vendors for our RFBs and IFBs and other services. And so there are ways to find them, but it is a challenge to make sure that everyone is actually doing that. As far as getting local vendors, Connie's going to talk a little bit about some more things that she's doing to try to encourage our local vendors to do business with the city.
Mayor, if I may, thank you so much for that. So then, why the word local if it's against the law to go straight directly to a local business first? I know that and if someone will look into it, I know that the state, their procurement, and it's what I've been told now, I don't know if it's a fact, if you'll look into it, their buyers have to contact 3 local businesses and minority and women-owned business prior to even going out anywhere else. So if you can look into that, if that's what the state is doing, then surely we can. But it sounds like, no, we don't really have an oversight for this method of buying. So I'd like to know if we're doing it, to what extent. Is it 50% of the time, 100% of the time? It sounds like it's our policy, but we're not necessarily enforcing it or following it.
Mr. Aldama, let me take a stab at this real quick. When I had my trailer business, a lot of the cities used to reach out to my company. It was a small company for bids. Wasn't any guarantee I was going to get the work, but if I didn't know about it, if I wasn't in that system, they'd literally call up and say, "We're getting ready to take bids. We'd like you to bid on it." Half the time I didn't get them, but at least they reached out and let me know that was coming up. as they did with a lot of other businesses, similar type businesses. And I think that's pretty much what you're saying, is at least let them know, because they may not have the capacity of the really large corporations that has a person on staff that just simply goes after those government bids.
Mayor, that's correct. And what I'm saying is that, yes, we can try to contact local businesses, and we have a policy saying that you'll, for certain procurements, you'll contact at least one minority and women-owned business. It isn't really that we don't enforce it, it's just a little bit hard to track and make, but it is a policy, and we do enforce it, and we do see compliance with that. It's just we can't always guarantee there's a women and minority-owned business providing that service. And then, as the mayor said, we can reach out as much as possible to local vendors, but we cannot compel them to either bid or, submit even a price quote. So those are things that we do. It's just we can't give them a local preference, is what I'm saying. So we can't give them additional points, or let's say all things being equal, one vendor has a lower price. We can't tip the scale in favor of another vendor because they're a local vendor. That's what I'm talking about. We can't give them additional points in RFP for being a local. That's what we're prohibited from doing.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for your comments as well. So if it's a policy, then here's what I'm asking, and I think this is what we should do. For anything over 5,000, you have to have 3 bids unless it's on a cooperative agreement that you can go out and use in a contract that's already been vetted. But if you're going to do 3 quotes, then there should be a form that's created. You got to have the 3 physical quotes, and then there needs to be a checkbox that says, I did contact a local minority or women-owned business, period. Yeah, you're right. You can't guarantee the work. You'd just be giving away the farm, but yes, I did. It tells procurement that, yes, it happened. It tells the council that, yes, it happened. We're not guaranteeing anybody anything, but yes, we went through the motion.
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Aldama, yes, we do have a form in place for that, and the process in place.
So then I heard earlier that we're not really enforcing it, so then you really are. There is review of that.
Mayor, members of the council, the challenge would be for the informal procurement, so less than 10,000, which requires a verbal or written quote. So for the verbal side, they're still required to have documentation, but for the 10,000 but less than 50,000, yes, it is required. We're able to monitor that, because when they're submitting their written quotes to us, they must submit that form that they've at least contacted the local and minority and women-owned businesses.
Yeah, and I just want to make sure that if that's what we're saying we're doing, that we need to be doing that. No, there is no guarantee to anyone. But if we're saying we're doing it, let's do it. And if it sounds like we are, I may just out of random ask to see something of that nature. But thank you, Mayor.
Okay, as part of our vendor outreach as well, we perform vendor trainings. Prior COVID, we had these trainings face-to-face to give our vendors an actual hands-on, walk them through the registration process, navigate them through the Munis system, show them what it looks like to bid on a solicitation, submit a proposal. We also invite the vendors to speak to each of the procurement officers, because we each handle a different section or department, I should say. And then we also, after the trainings, send out a survey for vendors to provide us additional feedback. In the first quarter or shortly thereafter, we'll be doing a virtual training to vendors and invite them in to walk through this process virtually. We also attend trade shows, reverse trade shows, and this is where vendors can come to our table, and it's open and free to each vendor to attend. So it gives them the opportunity to talk again to procurement, take a business card, leave their business card, see how to do business with the city. And those have had great turnouts. And the last one we attended was in Mesa, and I believe 2 or 3 years ago we had one here at the Civic Center. The last thing on the vendor outreach for now is that procurement is attending the Chamber's Business Over Breakfast in December to also talk about how to do business with the city. The next initiative is electronic submissions. Within the last 2 years, we implemented the electronic bid submission in Munis. This is where we can notify the vendors of available bids coming up. Vendors can see the important dates for that solicitation, submit their see the documentation, pull it down, download it rather, and see if there's been any addenda issued to the bid. Vendors submit their bids and attachments electronically as well, and these documents are there and available in perpetuity. And notifications we still advertise those in the Glendale Star, but we also send notifications electronically to all the vendors who have registered for certain commodities. And so it goes straight to those vendors. We also manually add vendors to this notification through our research for vendors who have actually provide those commodities. And this is through the Gov Spend, which I'll talk about more. Vendor self-service, obviously, this is one where the vendors register, and the link is found on the Procurement Enter page. We offer them a manual that they can download. We also provide a procurement email that they can call if they have issues registering. And we also give them a phone number to call for assistance, and we address those issues immediately. If there are problems and we just can't get them through the hoop on registering, we set a go-to meeting up and walk them through that process by them sharing their screen, and we show them where they need to get by the registration piece. So the next thing to talk about is the GovSpend Research Portal. This is a new tool we just purchased this year. It's a database where all the cities upload their purchasing information, so we can see what other cities have purchased what products and services, also what vendors have provided those products and services. We could see what they paid for those products and services to see if Glendale's getting a good cost on what we're wanting to buy. We can validate if a vendor is a sole source rather than taking the vendor's letter that they submit with their saying that they are a sole source. And we also use this to build upon our vendor pool, if you will, when we send out our notifications of a bid. The other thing is that we are members of the National Institute for Procurement. As an NIGP member, we have access to procurement trainings, resources, certifications in procurement, tools to ensure that we follow the best practices. All of procurement are members of this NIGP, and there are other city departments who are also members. Procurement uses this member list that for all of those who are part of NIGP, and this is national as well as citywide, or Arizona local, the state of Arizona. We kind of ping that member list to see if they've ever done a solicitation in this commodity or service, and we get feedback, and we ask for those kind of documents just to make sure we're not missing any information on our solicitations. We also just recently submitted for an accreditation, and it's good for 3 years, and part of the application process required us to identify the laws we operate under and those that gives procurement materials manager the authority to perform and delegate procurement activities. And the last thing on this list is the results-driven contracting. This came to us through the What Works Cities initiative that started here at the city in 2017. The Harvard Kennedy School Procurement Performance Lab, GPL, they work with cities to improve results achieved with their contracting dollars. So in 2019, GPL started working with procurement to implement this system. Before we started, however, working with GPL, there were some challenges the city had that we wanted to address as part of this effort. First, the city is a decentralized procurement. There's buyers in every department, and departments didn't actually engage procurement as a core part of the city's strategy to deliver better outcomes on the purchases and operated in separate silos, basically. With the implementation of simplicity, this is very visible. For example, multiple contracts existed for services such as temporary staffing, landscaping, and custodial services. Second, there was no tool or mechanism to consolidate these procurements. With the city departments working in silos, one department didn't know what the other department was purchasing. So this is a waste of staffing resources, and it also eliminated the ability to negotiate volume pricing and other contractual factors. Vendor performance and service quality varied across all of these contracts, and there is no accountability for the vendor or the city due to the lack of metrics, performance metrics in each contract. Third, another item was that we relied very heavily on linking agreements. And while they're good because the terms and conditions have been negotiated for us, the scope of work doesn't always meet our needs, and their performance metrics aren't there for what we need. And basically, RDC has provided us a repeatable system, procurement system that elevates and improves the high priority procurements here at the city.
Vice Mayor, or Mayor, I didn't realize you were.
Go ahead.
Sorry about that. I hope everyone will bear with me for a few minutes because this is where the rubber meets the road. So I did some research on my own, and I found a very interesting document created by the Manhattan Institute that was done in conjunction with the Harvard people that we are using or have used in the past. And it made some recommendations that I circled because I'd like to know if we are doing them, since these were recommendations from very reputable studies and sources in an attempt to make city procurement policies even better. And one of the major points within the study was it recommended that we appoint someone in City Hall who would be in charge of managing the city's overall portfolio of critical procurements, and that person have status within the city manager's office. So I would like to know if that is an initiative or a policy that we either employ now or have considered or will be doing.
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Clark, yes, we are in the process of recruiting a contracts program manager.
And what will be the authority or status of that position in conjunction, for example, to the city manager's office?
Mayor, members of the council, this employee would be working closely with the city manager's office, the city attorney's office, and the budget and finance department, and also the various departments who have, large dollar contracts, also development agreements and things like that.
Next question. They suggest that there be a development of a mission statement for each key or major procurement. Do we do such a thing?
Mayor, members of the council, as part of the NIGP accreditation that Connie mentioned, we have developed a mission statement and
Not an overall mission statement, a mission statement for each key procurement, each major procurement. And I think the reason why I'm so sensitive about all of this, I want you to think about this. A city's budget is composed of only two things, really: personnel and goods and services. We supply goods and services. Goods and services are a substantial part of the city's overall budget. And I think that it is important that we develop programs that instill confidence, not just in the general public, that procurement is being well-run, but within the vendor industry, that procurement is being well-run and is fair and is accountable. And that's why I'm honing in on these things. So can you answer the question that I just posed? Do you develop a mission statement for each key or major procurement?
Mayor and members of the council, and thank you for that, Councilmember Clark. We do. In each of our contracts that we just ran through this RDC process, the first thing is to develop a mission statement. And we also go through 5 worksheets to define or answer these types of questions, so that when we get to the RFP development, we have everything drawn out and identified.
Best answer I've heard this afternoon so far. My next question: do you conduct market research so that you understand not only the possible vendors that are out there, but that what they offer in terms of bids are truly competitive bids?
Mayor and members of the council, we sure do that. We use multiple tools, GovSpend being one, but we also check the state to see what they've purchased certain products and commodities for. And other cities, we make sure that we try to do as much research as we can.
Okay, this study suggested 2 new initiatives, which I'm not sure you either are aware of or have considered at this point. One is called problem-based procurement. Have you ever heard of that term before? And do you understand what it means?
Well, I do know that, I'm sorry, Mayor and members of the council, I do know that running through this RDC process, the problem statement is the first statement that we make.
Well, that's a start. What about pay for success as a concept? Do you know what that is, and have you considered its use?
Mayor and members of the council, if we're referring to incentives, vendor incentives, yes, we do consider that in our agreements that we run through the RDC process.
Well, the purpose of a pay for success initiative, what it does is it moves a city away from remedial costs that might occur after the contract has been completed, and it diminishes the probability that ineffective programs will continue to be used year after year after year. And so if you don't know anything about pay for success as a concept to implement within the procurement process, I would ask that you take some time to do some research on it, because I think it would be a very valuable tool. And then lastly, and just bear with me, Mayor, I know you are not happy with all my questions, but I need to ask them. You know that There are perceptions, there are public perceptions about the procurement process. And I think one of them derives from the fact that in contract after contract, we tend to use the same vendors over and over again. So the public questions whether there's a sense of complacency within the procurement process. And I'm not going to refer to any particular vendor, but there seems to be a stable of vendors that we go to and use repeatedly. So I just mentioned that as an aside. But you know that I have a problem with 5-year contracts for many reasons. You knew this was going to come up. So explain to me the city's rationale for using 5-year contracts. What are the benefits of using a 5-year contract, and are there any cons? Anybody who wants to take it? That's the $64,000 question this afternoon.
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Clark, for certain contracts, it certainly makes sense to do something more than 5 years. And
For instance, as you generalize through your answer, be specific, please, as you talk about this.
yes, Councilmember Clark, yes, an example would be the banking contract. To implement a new bank takes considerable effort and a lot of time, so it doesn't make sense to change banks every 5 years. In the past, we had our previous bank, which was Bank of America, for several years, and we did do an RFP for that one, just because we know that we've had them for several years, and we need to see what else is out there as far as pricing, and also the level of services that we're getting. So for that instance, that would make sense to do more than 5 years. Also for implementation of large softwares like our financial system, like the Munis. It took about a year to implement that, so you wouldn't want to turn around and implement a large system like that, and 3 or 4 years later, you'd do another implementation and go with a different vendor. What we are doing in procurement is we are monitoring the vendor spend, and we are making recommendations to departments to do an RFP. And at times, yes, the incumbent wins the RFP, but there are also times where the incumbent does not win the RFP. So it goes both ways. But part of what we're doing is looking at all procurements, including linking agreements, and making recommendations to issue an RFP to see if we could obtain better pricing and better services. And there have been times like when the fleet department was using a linking agreement, and we did an RFP, and that actually was to the benefit of the city because through the RFP, we were able to obtain better pricing for parts.
Well, let me just give you an example because it's on our agenda tonight. And I don't mean to pick on this one, but it just happens to be occurring tonight. We're going to enter into a linking agreement for recycling latex paint. It's a 5-year contract. This is not a banking service. Why do we find it necessary for a service that I would deem as not unusual? Why are we issuing 5-year contracts for common, ordinary services?
Mayor, members of the council, for that specific agreement, that is done through a cooperative agreement, which can be done per the city code, but we can certainly take a look at those types of contracts and make recommendations to the departments.
Well, that doesn't satisfy me, but it's a step in the right direction. And that's been my problem all along, and that's why you see me continually voting no on 5-year contracts. It isn't just that the information no longer becomes available to a new council member. For example, I approve a 5-year contract. I go away in 4 years, a new council member comes in, has no clue on anything about that previous 5-year contract. And so it's renewed for another 5 years or whatever. I believe that there's a disconnect and that I believe personally that for ordinary and usual services, a contract shouldn't be longer than 3 years. For goodness sakes, we can't forecast what the economy's going to be like in 3 years. And yet we're willing to give a vendor a set price for the next 3 years. And the other problem, I guess you're giving me an opportunity to vent, but the other problem is this. We issue these 5-year contracts, and then after, say, 2 years, the vendor comes along and says, "Oop, I need to charge you more for that service or that widget." And we go, okay, because the perception is there that who's got the deepest pockets in the economy? Government. So we go ahead and approve a price increase under the umbrella of the 5-year contract. I personally think that when a vendor comes and says, "I want an amendment to the contract and I'm going to charge you X dollars more for widget Y," that first of all, we do our own research to find out if that's valid. And if it's not, there should be some kind of specification within the contract that says when a vendor wants to amend the price of a good or a service, that automatically kicks in a rebid or a request for a rebid. And I would bet you, even putting in a specification like that it has to go out for bid again. If they want to come back to us and raise the price, that would tamp down a lot of these automatic amendments that continually come before us for a price increase in a contract that we're locked into. Those aren't really things that you need to answer, but they are things that have bothered me for a long time because of the fact, and I haven't done any research on how much of our budget is consumed by goods and services and the purchase thereof, but it's got to be at least half of our general fund budget, which is what, around $174 million. So it wouldn't surprise me to discover that approximately $80 million of our general fund budget goes strictly for goods and services through contracts. And that is a big deal to me.
Got another council member that has a question, plus the city
I'm
manager.
almost done. I just have one more thing, one more comment to make, and then I'm done venting.
Okay.
I think that in procurement, and I appreciate the processes that you've outlined in procurement. I think you're working very hard to make sure that they are objective as possible and try to take any kind of subjectivity out of it. But it's still, in many cases, a department function. And from where I sit, many departments get comfortable working with a particular vendor. So they choose that vendor repeatedly or recommend that vendor repeatedly because they're comfortable. They've used that company. They know what it's going to do, how it's going to do it, what the time frame is. So basically, it's a closed system where it's very hard for a new vendor to break into that system. And that's really my last comment. I didn't ask you questions so much as to comment on, this is an area of sensitivity to the general public, to myself, and I'm sure to this council, that we do everything we can to, one, encourage local business. And I don't know if Councilmember Aldama talked a great deal about local business, and I agree with everything he said. I just don't know how well we're really doing it. Show me some proof that you are really making a valid attempt to reach out to local businesses. Granted, they may not bid, but they at least deserve the information and the know. I'm going to stop there for now because I understand someone else wishes to speak to this, but
Okay,
But-
I'm gonna go to Councilmember Tomachoff and then our city manager next.
thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. I do have a question, though, because one of the answers to Councilmember Clark's question was that we're in the process of hiring a contracts program manager with relation to overseeing and somebody being responsible for procurement. But unless we're hiring more than one contracts manager, this says performs highly complex administrative and professional work involving the management and administration of contracts that are primarily management and usage and development agreements. Examples include, but are not limited to, the Gila River Arena, Renaissance Hotel Conference Center, Camelback Ranch Baseball Spring Training Facility, electronic billboard service agreements and development agreements. And the essential functions are to evaluate and monitor agreements and contracts for performance, compliance with deliverables, milestones, requirements, and other obligations, and to work effectively with city staff across different departments to document a common understanding of the terms and conditions of the respective agreements, contracts, and resolve questions about contract terms and conditions. I won't go any further, but there's not a word in here about procurement.
Thank
So-
you.
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Tolmachap, that it's the same position that you, description that you just read out loud. This person would be working closely with the procurement division, and in the past, the previous employee that we had was a key member of developing this results-driven contracting. So this person, though, the job description mainly focuses on contracts, but this person was, in the past, was part of implementing the procurement system that we have, also working closely with procurement and monitoring those various contracts, and also led development of RFP and standard language for RFPs. So yes, this person would be involved in procurement.
Mayor?
It just seems a little odd to me that there's not a single word in here about procurement or anybody who has any. Basically, it looks like the job description at least says that it's somebody basically to look at compliance and performance and deliverables and milestones. That's what it says, which seems like that would be a full-time job in itself. So I'm just curious. I mean, if we're moving towards that, maybe that's a discussion for another day. But when you brought that up, I looked up the job description. I was a little surprised by it.
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Clark, first of all, thank you for your comments. I know you do follow this very closely. Let me just throw a couple of things out. I mean, part of the reason for this presentation today is to really to highlight the work that we're doing in procurement to continue to get better and improve how we procure services and products for the city. Let me start by saying first that I don't know of a city department, at least not in my almost 5 years here, that is so flush with money that they really don't pay very close attention to what comes out of their budget for procurement. I think we have a very closely aligned alignment with not only the city manager's office, but the council, that we want to make sure that we acquire our goods and services at the most cost-effective way. I know this was kind of highlighted in the presentation, but some of the things that we're really excited about is like on the GovSpin Research Portal. This is the first time we're actually going to be able to look at a contract that we've let and now go in and see from a whole host of other governments here in the area that have relevant pricing. I mean, it doesn't do any good for us to look at a government contract in Detroit, but we can certainly pull up information for here within the valley, within the state of Arizona, and we can do comparison. So you mentioned the contract tonight for the paint. Actually, what that is, it's a 5-year deal, but every year we have the ability, if we don't like the pricing, that we don't have to renew going forward. So the GovSpin Research Portal will be a great tool in that we can lock in a vendor. However, at any time if we feel like the pricing due to different circumstances that might arise, say if it's a petroleum-based product and maybe the oil prices have come plummeting down, there would be an example where you may see new pricing coming out that would be to our advantage. In this case, we would be able to re-procure that. And again, the results-driven contracting, as well our procurement accreditation, all those are designed to make sure that we're doing best practices for how we acquire things. I will say that there is, having been a vendor, and before I got elected in government, my company participated in government procurements for meeting, conference, and catering services. I will tell you that when I went to bid on a product, on an RFP, that there's a cost to the vendor to do it. And so B, when I came time to price, I would be more aggressive on my pricing for a longer-term contract than for a shorter-time contract. The risk kind of goes both ways. Pricing can come down, and then also pricing can go up. One only has to look at the cost of PP&E. If you compared what the cost was to procure PP&E in, say, February versus what the cost would be to procure it in June. So I think the risk can go both ways, but we work really hard to continue to monitor what we're paying for services. But again, I appreciate all the questions that you had, and I think as you hear here, really we're on a track to continue to be, I think, a model city in terms of how we procure services.
Mayor? Thank you, Mayor. I'm on the State of Arizona website under their procurement, and just want to make sure, we want to go back to the small business conversation. And Councilmember Clark, thank you for chiming in on that, because it is really, really important that we recognize our small businesses. But this is what they have under their procurement, small businesses. So you can just tell me if this is what we practice. Small businesses from the foundation of our thriving Arizona economy and are encouraged to compete for all state contracts. Arizona law requires the state agencies purchases of less than $100,000 be from small businesses if practicable. The definition of a small business by the state of Arizona is a small business means a concern including an affiliates, which is independently owned and operated, which is not dominant in its field, and which employs fewer than 100 full-time employees, or which had gross annual receipts of less than $4 million in its last fiscal year. So do we follow that guideline on less than $100,000 from small businesses?
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Aldama, we can certainly take a look at what the Arizona procurement at the state has, and then we'll see what we can incorporate in our policy.
Mayor, thank you. And look, listen, I work for a public entity, and there's a reason why there's complex procurement laws, rules, and blocks in between employees. They're there for the protection of the taxpayers' dollars, one, to protect the buyer, the employee. But I heard earlier that, yeah, we're doing this. It doesn't sound like we're doing this. So please, yes, if you'll get back to me, the state of Arizona is saying right here, less than $100,000 be from small businesses. And I knew that they were doing something to that effect. So if you will follow up with the entire council, we'd like to see how we can better support our small businesses as defined by the state of Arizona. Thank you, Mayor.
Mayor, Councilmember O'Donnell, a question, and I appreciate what state of Arizona is doing. You know, their scale of procurement is so much larger. So I guess what I don't know whether I heard that or not. It would seem to me what you're saying is we may not be the $100,000 threshold, but we want to make sure we have a plan in place that we establish that threshold, and then that becomes kind of how we do it. Or are you saying that any contract that we issue for $100,000 or less would fall under that policy?
Mayor, if I may, thank you, City Manager Phelps. I say let's look at creating a policy similar to the state of Arizona's. We tailor it specific to the size of our city and our size of procurement, but you're absolutely right. We may look at it and say, yeah, 100,000 is appropriate. It may be 50,000, but tailor it to the size of our city. But I feel comfortable that hopefully this council agrees, but yes, thank you, sir. Thank you, Mayor.
Mayor? I'm going to follow up on Council Aldama's remark because the specific reference within state code is the following: 41-2535, entitled Procurements Not Exceeding a Prescribed Amount, semicolon, Small Businesses, semicolon, Simplified Construction Procurement Program. And under letter B, any procurement that does not exceed the aggregate dollar amount of less than $100,000 shall be restricted, if practicable, to small businesses as defined in the rules adopted by the director. The procurement officer shall rotate the small business solicited to compete for any procurement of less than $100,000. If it is impracticable to restrict a particular procurement to a small business, the procurement officer shall make a determination setting forth the reasons and place it in the contract file. That is ARS 41-2535. Thank you, Mayor.
Next.
So I think we skipped a slide, but I'll just kind of, thank you. So part of the RDC process, we gather data about all the contracts that are coming up to expire in the next year and identify any new contracts or services that the city may need. We then consolidate this to a list, and add certain criteria that we've defined, and the criteria can change year over year depending on our needs. Then we develop the team and start ranking those contracts, or based on, if they're public facing, deal with the citizens, or such as custodial, or had past performance issues, or not meeting service levels. And we also determine if it should be a citywide effort versus departmental. And then the team gets together, we select the top 3 to run through that RDC process. And then some of the strategies that we use to address the challenges and building the mechanisms to improve contract performance is to create standard metrics and track contractor performance, identify key outcomes to achieve the results we want from the contracts, and build evaluation criteria to effectively evaluate proposal responses. And then we repeat this annually at the beginning of the year, fiscal year. And then at the end of all that, we do the active contract management once those contracts are awarded. So to wrap it up, in fiscal year 2019 to 2020, I completed the award or intent to award of 5 custodial contract or landscaping contracts. We completed a solicitation and evaluation of 2 custodial services, and we updated RDC GPL's forms, working with them, providing feedback to them. We updated our solicitation template, and we gave RDC feedback also on the worksheets. In FY 2021, to date, we have a new team formed, and we've ranked over 107 contracts to run through the process. We completed training to all the department members in October. We prioritized the 3 contracts we'll be moving forward with, and those are security services, HVAC repair and maintenance, gate and door repair maintenance. And with that, we'll close closed for any additional questions.
Not seeing any. All right, thank you. Okay, next item, item number 2.
Council item of special interest, medical response unit.
Mayor, members of the council, here to provide staff report is Deputy City Manager Rick St. John.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the council. I have Chief Garrison with me as well, but I believe he had to use the restroom, so he'll be here in just a second. Welcome for me commenting on that. So today I'm here to provide information on Councilmember Hughes' council item of special interest of adding a second medical response unit to the fire department this fiscal year within the adopted public safety budget. I need to keep my head straight, otherwise I think I keep losing traction with the microphone. As you know, in this past budget cycle, the council approved our first medical response unit, and we just graduated the firefighters who we hired on in July. They graduated in the middle of November or a week or so ago and are out on the street now backfilling for vacancies due to modified duty, COVID-related illness, quarantines, things of that nature. And we have plans to stand up that medical response unit hopefully in the fourth quarter sometime, but we're paying very close attention to our overtime budget right now to make sure that we are as responsible as we can be in that area before we stand up this medical response unit. That medical response unit will be stood up at Station 53, 59th and Thunderbird, and will support the fire stations along the 59th Avenue corridor. As you read in the staff report, some of the response times for those stations are higher than we would like them to be, and we believe that medical response unit will help to drive those response times down. Some general information about medical response units. They are a cost-efficient and effective way of helping to reduce response times in busy stations. They are peak time deployment. A couple of things about our calls for service. Over the last 5 years, calls for service have increased by about 11.3% across the city. 87% of the total calls for service are medical in nature or EMS calls, and about 60% of that 87% are advanced life support or ALS calls for service. The remaining 40% are basic life support or low acuity calls. And we do have 2 low acuity units that are deployed in the city today. We have 1 medical response unit deployed in the city today from the city of Phoenix out of Station 54. And that medical response unit will go into Glendale or Phoenix depending on where the call and need is. The Life Safety Council for the automatic aid system has spoken and agreed that any other medical response unit deployed by any city, that medical response unit will stay within the jurisdiction of the city funding that unit. So MR 153, if you will stay in the city of Glendale and only respond for our citizens. Any additional medical response units deployed in the future will also stay within our jurisdictional boundaries for our citizens. The medical response unit can be easily moved around the city. So they deploy in a truck as opposed to an engine, so a heavy-duty truck as opposed to an engine, making them much easier to deploy around the city. And a second medical response unit, should we get one in the future, would be used to backfill for companies that are out of service for training. Typically, they go out of service for a couple of hours, a 4-hour block perhaps, to conduct training, and that training occurs every day during the week. And the medical response unit would be used as a backfill unit, probably out of Station 58 is what we're thinking. The cost for a medical response unit includes one-time costs and then, of course, ongoing personnel costs, and you can see those numbers on the screen. It's just under $300,000 for the one-time cost, which include, and that's an all-in cost. So it's everything from the hiring process to training to the turnouts they wear when they're in the academy, and then the dual set of turnouts that they get when they get out of the academy. They're separate sets of turnouts, and then the particulate hoods SCBAs, anything else that a firefighter needs to perform their function. And then the ongoing costs are the personnel and the retirement cost, of course, and then any other benefits that go into their salaries. And that's roughly $531,655. That includes a captain, engineer, and 2 firefighters. So we do have some options in the current fiscal year for funding the one-time costs. We have salary savings from a couple of vacant positions that we can use, and then we have some existing equipment. So during the COVID pandemic, the height in around March, April, we began to put together a medical response unit that could be deployed immediately should the numbers justify. We never had to deploy that unit, but we do have that equipment available, and it can be used at this time. Now, I have the statement up there that salary savings from vacant positions can be used. While that is true, we anticipate both in police and fire that this fiscal year we will be in the red. Overtime costs are quite high for the fire department and are trending high in the police department as well. And we anticipate that it will be very close in the police department, but fire department is likely to be in the red by the end of the fiscal year. And any salary savings will only help to reduce the amount, the dollar amount that we come in the red. Options for the ongoing costs. As I just explained, there isn't any contingency or wiggle room in the current operating or salary budgets for police and fire. So we have to either reassign sworn personnel that are currently serving in some service need within the community. We can reduce our non-sworn community service program, or we can reassign personnel in an internal administrative program. Those are really our options, but you're going to have to reduce something to get this something new. And with that, I'll open it up for discussion and answer any questions the council might have.
I've got 2 or 3 questions. So probably shouldn't joke about this, but you said that they're going to be in the red. The fire's going to be in the red, but the police are going to be in the blue.
Mayor,
Both going to be in the red.
they're both going to be in the red, I
Okay.
believe, but we'll do our best to stay in the black.
Okay. All right. And I'm glad that this was brought up. I guess my question is, this council made a decision to fund everything that we're funding currently right now. It's been brought up every campaign. This last campaign was a fairly nasty campaign, but it was brought up over and over and over how important that this is. And I truly believe it is. I know our city has grown dramatically. I know that our times are starting to stretch out longer than they should. And all of us, I believe, I'm speaking for everybody, all of us want what's best for our citizens, for our city. What I would ask the council, if they would go along with this, is that we don't change what we're currently doing right now, but ask that our city manager really dig as deep as he can, looking for anything possible. Doesn't have to be done today, but in the near future where we can try to get this second unit going, and hopefully that first unit will get stood up here in the next, hopefully 4 weeks or so, I'm hoping. But I think this is going to get worse for all of us rather than better. At this point, I would like to not do anything with this as far as the decision today. I'd like to actually table this today. But I would seriously like the city manager to do whatever he possibly can, any resources available to find some other alternative where we can fund these. I think they're important, and I think the council would agree with that. But we can certainly have discussion if anybody would like to. But I would like to table this today and not take any action on this today.
Thank you, Mayor. Just one question. You mentioned that there's going to be a lot of overtime. Would this new MRU not help reduce some of that overtime? Or, I mean, is there no impact on that?
Mayor, Vice Mayor, if we deploy another unit in the field that's not part of the constant staffing model, we still have to backfill those employees that are on modified duty or are out because of a COVID-related quarantine. We still have to backfill them on the constant staffing units, and so it would not impact overtime.
Thank you, Mayor. So, and just want to walk back through the unit that we had in the budget that we thought we were going to have, and I pulled up the May 5th budget meeting. There's a couple things I wanted to ask about. Mr. St. John, you said that there was a grant application had been made to purchase the MRU, but that it had not yet been awarded. What is the status of that grant application that you mentioned in May?
Mayor, Councilmember Tommelchoff, thank you for that question. I did mean to mention that we were notified last week that we did not receive the grant.
Mayor, if I could continue, and that we were going to initially use basically overtime savings, and I understand that the 4 recent graduates basically are not, even if we were going to stand this up to the first unit up today, they're out basically roving station to station, backfilling people who are out on quarantine and trying to fill in the gaps to prevent more overtime. Is that right?
Mayor, Councilmember Tommelchoff, that's correct. If we wait to stand up that medical response unit, those employees can be used to backfill at straight time, thereby reducing the overtime cost for the constant staffing units.
So, Mayor, when will we be in a position to stand up the initial MRU that we thought we were going to be able to deploy? I thought we were talking about probably January, and at least when we did in May, we were talking about January.
Mayor, Councilmember Tommelchoff, we are looking at the 4th quarter, hopefully April 1st. So basically, in order to stand up another unit, we're going to have to or to stand up even the initial unit, have a better handle on COVID. And we started getting the numbers again in the daily report because I had asked for them. I didn't see anybody in fire on quarantine, but I saw 13 in PD that are quarantined, and I think that's kind of what we're dealing with. What's really pushing this overtime is that any exposure until that, I don't know, I'm not exactly sure how that's working, but that's creating a lot of overtime to backfill people who can't come to work because there's been an exposure. Mayor, Councilmember Tommelchoff, that's correct. When an employee in an essential function has a significant exposure, they can, according to CDC, state and county health guidelines, they can still come to work. They have to wear a mask, maintain physical distancing, which is difficult in the fire services, but we do the best we can with that. If they are symptomatic, then they cannot come to work. And that is some of what we are dealing with in public safety right now. We have symptomatic employees that are pending test results or have tested positive and are quarantined because of that.
It's pretty scary out there for these first responders right now, that they really don't have any idea what they're walking into. I'd like to get this thing out sooner rather than later. I agree with the mayor, though. Let's let the city manager see if he can find a way to do it. But I just wanted to clarify. The one thing was about the grant so we're not going to. Hopefully, maybe there's some other grant opportunities out there for other vehicles now with some of the other programs that are available. But if not, I mean, this is something to get I agree, we're growing. We're not going to build a new fire station, at least for the foreseeable future. And we don't have the bodies even to do this right now. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, I would say I absolutely agree with you that we should table this for further deeper discussion and allow the city manager to bring forth a recommendation that he feels is appropriate. However, here's where I stand on this. Absolutely, you cannot fault the councilman for bringing the item of interest. Anytime somebody wants to improve our public safety, hoorah, absolutely. Fire or police. So, Councilmember Hugh, thank you. I mean, I support that. The philosophy I feel we should have for our public safety today for both police and fire is similar to the one we created years ago for our parks, is let's not create more parks. Let's not build new parks. Let's maintain what we have. Let's support the men and women in police and fire today. And we are in a pandemic, and Councilmember Tommelchoff, you're absolutely correct. We're bursting at the seams with overtime. We need to support those two departments right now, and our police office, talking specifically to police, our community needs them today. I see no reason why we shouldn't look at this at the MRU unit, how we can deploy the second one, but we haven't even deployed the first one. So I support the mayor on tabling it, absolutely, get a great recommendation from the city manager and his staff. But let's support our police officers and firefighters today for the work that they're doing. And boy, I'll tell you what, this pandemic is just beating the pants off them. And so that's the philosophy I think we should have. So thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. I too, like other council members, I agree with you, and hopefully I look forward the city manager can come up with another funding source. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I have advocated for these MRU units for years and years and years, as you well know. I think they're critical and will reduce costs over the long haul for the fire department. I don't remember, so I as much as I recognize and appreciate what COVID has done to public safety budgets in regards to overtime, excuse me, but fire department has never come in at budget. In all the years that I've served on council, you've always been over budget. You've never developed a budget that comes in at the level at which you set it every year. So that's nothing new. But I will say this, I believe these units are critical. They're long overdue. I am concerned to find that the first unit has not been stood up because of the pandemic and the fact that you have to use these bodies to fill in for firefighters who are out due to COVID. And I understand the need, but it's very disappointing to see that our approval of the first unit has not even become a reality yet. I support the mayor's suggestion to table and look forward to the city manager coming up with some kind of funding solution, at least to get the first unit up and out as soon as possible. I think it's really critical to this city. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Turner's next, and then our city manager.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. So regarding the situation where we are likely to come in the red in both police and fire, would we then not look to the contingency budget to make that even, or we have to do something?
Mayor, Councilmember Turner, that would be my hope, yes.
Okay.
But I'm the Deputy City Manager for Public Safety, so I'll always take more money.
Well, I mean, if we're in the red, we can't just write, bad checks to cover it. We would have to find the money somewhere, and it occurs to me that it could well be the contingency. So then when I look at slide 6, and there's 3 options for where we find the ongoing costs, but our contingency account isn't one of the options on there, and I think that, I would ask why not. We don't have to answer that today, but it seems to me that our contingency is always a place we could go to be able to provide our residents the vital services that we think they need. And so I would wonder, I'd be interested to find out why it's not on here. And in reality, we haven't been as flush in this city as we are right now in 15 years probably. So we should be able to figure this out, particularly seeing as how much money we got through the CARES Act that goes towards COVID-related expenses and public safety in general. So I know that we in our last workshop, we discussed, how to deal with the CARES Act money, but I have a hard time believing that this MRU issue has appeared just in the last 2 weeks. So it should have perhaps been included in that discussion as what we might want to do with CARES money. And then lastly, these 3, I'll call them bullet points, these 3 dashed points here, I have a hard time understanding what they mean. reassignment of sworn personnel in community service programming, non-sworn in community service programming. I understand the distinction between sworn and non-sworn, but if we're talking about changing positions or eliminating positions and things like that, I think we should be specific about what we're talking about for the council's sake and for our community's sake. And then as to the point of reassigning sworn personnel in an internal administrative program, I think that should be a lot more specific for us too. If we're going to have a future conversation about this, let's really have the conversation and not discuss, big, vague terms. If there's a certain program that would be eliminated in, one of those bullet points, we should know what we're talking about. Or if there's specific reassignment of certain personnel, we should know that that's what we're talking about. And because it does bring to mind that with our police and fire both, we operated under I believe a 2-year MOU, Memorandum of Understanding. And if these changes that are being suggested to us would alter that, then we need to know that that's what we're talking about. And that we're not just talking about, well, we're going to get rid of some minor program with little impact. So that'd be my request. I'm happy to table it today. And if it does come back, I'd like it to come back with a lot more clarity. Thank you.
Mr. Phelps.
Mayor, members of the council, I'll try to address both the comments from Councilmember Turner and Councilmember Clark. First, when we, if you recall, 2 weeks ago when we had, or several weeks ago when we had the discussion on the COVID, we specifically set aside $5 million for additional contingency, and it was for things like not having a complete handle on what the impact of COVID might be on things like overtime would be a key example. So the request of the council item of special interest was not about the use of general fund contingency. It was specific to the city manager to come back with recommendations within the existing approved public safety budget. So we felt we had to narrow down our recommendations to those items. So that's why we didn't have that's why I didn't mention use of contingency here, because contingency, as it relates to the police and fire budget, we don't have a pot of contingency that's there. I want to be clear, we've actually started in the fire department, Chief Garrison, we started the implementation of the MRU. And the first step was actually getting the 4 sworn personnel, a captain, an engineer, and paramedic and firefighter. And we just graduated them, I believe, 2 weeks ago, Chief, is that correct? So that has been in process. Now, let me be clear. We could stand up an MRU unit really quick. But because of COVID, what we're going to see is if we put another MRU unit in place, our cost, our overtime gap is going to increase. Because we still have, on a constant staffing model, we still have to replace those firefighters or police officers who are out for COVID. So it was our recommendation from the city manager's office that we delay when we stand the MRU unit up so that we could use our 4 new FTEs that the council granted to help minimize the overtime that we're going. So if the council, so that we could stand it up sooner. That wasn't our recommendation. Our recommendation is let's go ahead and use them, get them around through the system, get a chance to work with all the different stations, and then stand it up around the end of March, 1st of April. But if the council wants to go a different direction, we can. Councilmember Clark, you did mention the overtime budget, and it has been a challenge since I've been here. But as we dove into it, and this came to us from our budget and finance department during our last budget creation, is that we had kind of done a number of things over the years that were new initiatives that we asked the fire department to do, but were never fully funded. And so actually we had made adjustments to the budget this year so that we felt we could manage the overtime budget and actually bring it in to where it's within the budgeted amount. Then COVID showed up, and of course our overtime, due to the number of firefighters and number of shifts we've lost since March, it was incredibly high. So I do appreciate the comment, because you're absolutely right. We had, there's been a continual problem of coming in within budget on overtime we made some significant adjustments to the fire budget so that we could have more accountability, and the chief understood that. But this is something that has kind of gone beyond, beyond where the council's at. So again, we do have the $5 million in contingency. That would be probably a source for covering overtime. If the council wanted to stand up a second MR unit, again, you kind of hold the purse strings in terms of the contingency amount. Our thought is, since this is a new initiative, let's continue to work towards that. We'll be in budget discussions here in about 120 days, and I think it'd be our thought, if there's a desire to have a new MRU unit, that we could clearly include that in our budget request for 2021 and 22.
All right, thank you, Mr. Phelps. And I want to be clear, when you said fourth quarter, in my mind, I'm thinking calendar year, not fiscal year, which is why I said December. City Manager, my suggestion for tabling was to give you the opportunity to look at any option possible, come back and make a recommendation that we can move forward with, is what my recommendation was. Is there a consensus for that?
Yes, Mayor, but
Okay.
I would like to throw
Go ahead.
one other comment out there. And I know this will be controversial, but I'm going to present it anyhow. A lot of the reason over the years that fire has always had overtime problems is constant staffing. I don't know if there's an alternative to that or not, or if there's some better methodology for employing personnel within the fire department. But I think it's time to take a look at what's out there and see if there's any way, if we're wedded to constant staffing till we die, or if there is an alternative methodology out there that can help us achieve greater certainty with regard to overtime. Thank you, Mayor.
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Clark, I think what you actually are seeing is we've developed, in working closely with the fire administration and with our firefighters, is we actually are doing a hybrid staffing model now. So what we're doing is we have our base constant staffing model, which has been kind of established over the years. But if you recall, we have added in, since 2016, we've added in 2 dynamically staffed low acuity teams, and then the MRU units will also be dynamically staffed. And by that meaning, we're not constant staffed on those positions. We're going to be creating the hours where we have the highest call volume. And so the low acuity team works a 10-hour day. They do not work a 24-hour shift. We think the hybrid model is really an ideal way to deal with the peaks and fluctuations of call response, because in a constant staffing model, you don't know when you're going to have a need. Sometimes, but we know we have to have a basic minimum level of staffing. What we do know is that calls for EMS, for example, are measurably higher during about a 10-hour to 12-hour window of the day, that we can add another shift just for that. So we think that right now that the real progress, and I have to compliment not only our chief but also our labor group, is they have agreed to the low acuity teams being dynamically staffed. They have also agreed to the medical response unit being dynamically staffed. And I think that hybrid model, from my perspective, and one who's looked at the constant staffing model, both as a policymaker and now from an administrative side, I really think it's the right solution to allow us to grow as our city grows and as our calls for response increase. We can better address them through a dynamically staffed additional on the MRU. In general, our fire calls have not seen a significant increase. Where we've seen it obviously is that with the growth within our calls for response typically has been in the EMS side. And so really the MRU units are really ideally situated to help address that. So I appreciate the comment. I think you're absolutely right. I think if you were wedded only to a constant staffing model, you may miss opportunities to better serve the citizens. But again, I want to compliment Chief Garrison and our team because I think we've got a great model going forward.
Mayor, if I could comment on that. I agree with you completely. And I guess I didn't use the right concept in talking about hybrid, but it is logical to me that the sooner that we can stand up these medical units, that after effect will be to reduce overtime costs. So what we've got to keep our eye on the ball is, and maybe we need to look at, or you need to present some information to us, that if we have the too low acuity, the too high acuity, what does that do in terms of reducing overtime costs for the constant staffing? Show us, because I think it's an important part, not only to deliver a critical service to the community, but show us the effects of how important these medical units are, considering that 80% of the calls that we service every year are medical and not fire-related. So let's work cooperatively to figure out how we can get all these acuity units up and running, and then let's also take a hard look at their effects on the whole concept of the constant staffing, and if that reduces any need or the intense need for overtime that we experience yearly. Thank you, Mayor.
Phelps?
Mayor, City Councilmember Clark. So let me walk through. We see the benefits on a 4-person staff versus a 2-person. So our low acuity team, while it's dynamically staffed, is two firefighters. Where we think the advantage comes in on our first MRU is that we have a captain, engineer, paramedic, firefighter. And so often during the course of what we do as best practice within the department, we're in a constant training process. So we'll maybe pull and do an update on hazmat, for example, which generally, before we had the MRU, we would backfill that position, or that shift, for that maybe 6 or 8 hour window while they were in training. And then once they were done with training, they go back into the constant staffing model. We went with the 4-person MRU so that if, say, Station 156 was going to be pulled out of action on a Thursday for, let's say, for 6 hours or 8 hours of training, we could assign the MRU unit to switch over to 156 and to go ahead and to staff that. And now they're all trained, so that we have a captain, engineer, paramedic, firefighter, so we can they can fill in that shift without having to bring in additional staffing on overtime. So now, whether or not the second MRU is going to do that, I think our initial analysis, it would have less impact on overtime than the first one. But we really believe the first one's going to have, a measurable, will be a good tool for us to kind of measure or to moderate our use of overtime. So that's why it's a 4-person where the low acuity is 2. I mean, in theory, I guess you could do a 3-person MRU. It won't meet what the international standards are for the best way to respond to a high acuity call, for example. But if you only have 3 people, you still are going to be filling back. You're going to be bringing somebody in overtime when we've got a station out for training. So this is a way for us, as we are training and pulling people off shifts for a period of time, we can roll them over. But the next day, they may be responding in an MRU capacity.
Thank you, Mayor. Regarding the overtime issue and this, I mean, I'm very much in support of an additional MRU. And again, I know we're not quite there yet, but I'm very much in support of that. It seems to me that, taking a little bit of a pause may be appropriate, because it sounds like COVID is causing us quite a bit of overtime. We don't anticipate that to stand forever. Hopefully we're out of this in the next 12 months or so. But perhaps we can if we can stand up one unit fully, and maybe on the second one, maybe we need to wait just a little bit to see how our finances are coming in with overtime. I haven't heard a dollar amount, what we're expecting this overtime to be by the end of the year for our fire department, and so it could be significant. And if it is significant, maybe we do need to pause if there's no additional advantage to the second unit to reduce overtime. So I would be in agreement to perhaps, study this a little further and see where else we can go with it. But I do believe that a pause may be appropriate until we kind of get a better grasp of where COVID's going to end up.
Chief, I've got a question for you. We're short on personnel as far as being able to stand this up. What are the plans to bring four new folks on that can start that training process? How long does that take? And even if we postpone this, with people retiring, don't we still need those people in place?
So, Mayor, members of the council, our academy at this time, the hiring process takes several months, and then the academy itself is 14 weeks, and then we get our member out in the field. And the good thing about Glendale is when we get our member in the field, our newest firefighter, we use them as part of our 4-person staffing. And there's departments across the country, and even in the valley here, who use them as a 5th person until they gain experience. We feel like our academy is successful enough where we put them right into the general population, so to speak, and they become part of that 4-person staffing. So that's the time it takes to actually get them trained up and get them ready to go. There's been a lot of discussion about the constant staffing model. So the way it works now, just a little bit, one more second of that so you understand it fully, is that we have 56 positions in the field that are all hazard positions that we use, that we staff every day to keep the city safe. And we've had the Citygate study, and we do our own studies every period, and we're always watching response times and call volume. So those 56 are the all hazards units. Then we have the other 4, which are the low acuity peak time units, the hybrids that the city manager talked about. So if any additional units we put in, we still have the 56. So where this is going to help us is to help, as soon as we get, and what we're using them for now is to staff that 56. And that's very helpful for us. So we have them out in the field, they're on fire engines, they're on ladder companies, and we're staffing the city, keeping the city, what we feel is this city really is pretty renowned throughout the country as one of the most highly qualified fire departments in the country. Kevin talked a little bit about our training. We train on technical rescue and hazmat every Monday and Tuesday. We train on EMS training every Wednesday. We do company training and drills every Thursday. We have our multi-company trainings on Fridays, and then we even train on Saturday and Sunday. And we make sure that we invest a lot of money. We say every $1 you put in training, you get $2 out. So we invest a lot of time in our training. Fires are becoming less frequent, which means they're becoming, that's less frequent but high hazard. So we got to make sure we're ready for those. Councilmember Clark said it perfectly. Actually, EMS is about 87% of what we do now. And we break that down into the type of BLS, the 2-person calls, and 4-person ALS calls. NITS, the National Institute of Standards, Training and Standards, has identified that it takes 4 people to work an ALS call, with 2 of those people being paramedics. So we actually provide the highest level of service to our citizens, and that's what we probably ought to leave here. I want to make sure I get across today that because of the support that you all have done over the past couple of years, and I've been here 5 years, but Kevin and I came about the same time, is that you've invested in LA units, you've invested in, the mayor was able to speak with Phoenix and get an MR unit that works really well. That's the one MR unit that travels from one city to the next and takes the closest EMS call. So we've done quite a bit, and I think this hybrid system is going to work really well for us. As we continue to grow, we're going to continue to grow on the west side. That's a great start there. So I just want to say from the fire service, thank you very much. But it does take time to train a firefighter. It does take, when you're training firefighters, you have to use some of your capacity in the field, the fire captains, to train those firefighters, make sure they're adequately trained. So I know that's a long answer, but I've been really quiet over here, and I just wanted to jump in.
You answered everything, but the one thing I was trying to find out.
Okay.
At what point do we need to actually have people in the academy so we know that we're staffed, ready to go? With retirements happening?
I'm sorry, Mayor and members of the council, so we're actually doing that now. I signed a document today, the next academy starts February, and what we do is, because of our regional approach, we have a regional fire academy, so we make sure that it's coordinated with the other cities throughout the valley, including the East Valley cities. We have Tempe and Scottsdale that come to our academy. And then the actual, so we just finished this class, and then we're turning around and we're starting another one as soon as we can, which is February, and that'll be a 14-week class, and we'll be ready to go with the newest members.
Mayor, I think the question you're asking, how do we backfill, do we only do the 4? I believe, Chief, our last class was 16 that we graduated?
So it was 14, and then the next classes, we're looking at 12. So we think we're able to get a really good count of who's leaving, because we know when they're leaving based on the end of their drop. And we look at the attrition, we look at what kind of positions you allow us to hire for, and we always try to get ahead of the curve with our hiring. Now, we got to be careful with that. People don't leave the exact day the academy starts. So we had permission most recently to hire for, we know we have a member leaving 4 weeks after the academy starts, and we got permission through Rick to hire another person to fill for that person, because that person will be gone. And it's good for us to hire 2 months earlier than 8 months later because of the overtime impact.
Okay. I think you answered my question. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. You're on the same wavelength that I am. I'm sitting here thinking the only way to roll this out sooner rather than later. If the next academy's not till February, you're talking probably May, maybe, really probably next fiscal year almost by the time you're able to even roll this out. So I'm also a little curious though, because do we have to get these people from the academy? Because do we ever, I'm not sure how this works. Maybe this is a really dumb question, but do we ever just post a job? There may be firefighters in other cities who'd rather not work a constant staffing model anymore, that might desire to be hired in a city where this staffing model, this might appeal more to their family life or other things they have going on in their life. So is that the only resource we have to recruit these 4 people, is just through the academy, or do we ever look at other ways to possibly staff this?
I think they call that laterals.
So I'm just curious, because it may appeal to people. I think when we started the low acuity, we thought no one was going to want to do it, and we were a little bit surprised that there were quite a few people who it was maybe more appealing for their lifestyle to work a more traditional work day.
So Mayor, members of the council, it's traditionally we've hired, and then we trained our own firefighters, and even through our automatic aid agreement, we state that we will train firefighters through the 4 specific regional academies that are in place in the valley here. So we haven't reached out, and I guess what you may be asking is, would we hire a firefighter who's trained someplace else and bring them in here? Fires burn pretty much the same, but the operations are somewhat different. And when you put a member into a high hazard situation with a group of other members, you want to make sure that they kind of understand how things are done here. So that's just been our tradition. I'm sure it's something we could probably talk about. I think we're being extremely creative with our deployment model right now, and we'll just continue to work that way.
Oh, Mayor, thank you for that, Chief. So honestly, the only way to move this along any faster would be to backfill overtime, if we were talking about, because we don't have the bodies to really probably to do it any other way. So I'm sure the city manager will be able to bring us some sort of proposal to do it, but it sounds like without 4 additional bodies that there's literally no other way to do it but to at least temporarily backfill overtime, at least for the time being, so that the 4 recruits that were intended for this use can stand this unit up at some point. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, we have a consensus? Yes? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Rick. Next item is the city manager's report. Mr. Phelps.
Mayor, members of the council, just a couple quick items. One, the Arizona Commerce Authority through the state of Arizona has been working with Amazon Web Services with a goal to train 5,000 students to be kind of in the area of cloud computing. And Glendale Community College was one of the two community colleges that were selected to receive the initial investment in resources and tools. In addition, West Mech was also selected, and so both of those are here in the West Valley, and so we think this is very good news, and it's meeting one of our objectives internally through our economic development, which is to create more high-tech jobs. It starts with having a qualified workforce in that area. The second, just a quick update. I've been told that the Arizona Coyotes, as you know, I'd asked them through request a month and a half ago to see whether a longer-term agreement could be entered into. It's been told to me that the Coyotes have submitted an initial outline for a longer-term agreement that would be longer than the year-to-year. And that if it hasn't already been done, shortly that ASM will be responding to that and perhaps providing a counter proposal or just more additional information. So that continues to progress along. Just if you recall, I've asked to see if at all possible they could reach some kind of conclusion on a framework for a long-term deal by the early part of December. So I'll continue to keep the council informed, and that is my report, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. City Attorney's report.
No report today, thank you.
Thank you. Council item special interest. Each council member has the opportunity to indicate topics they'd like to have discussed by this council in the future. Mr. Aldama.
Yes, Mayor, thank you. It'll be the same one we talked about during the procurement presentation, and I'll just word it this way so we get it on the record so we can make sure it comes back. That staff create a procurement process that ensures a dollar amount threshold that triggers the use of small and local businesses. And I would be open to meet with staff. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Clark.
Yes, Mayor. As we know, the voters of the state have approved the use of recreational marijuana. With that in mind, the Peoria City Council already or will be considering an ordinance on November 10th that will prohibit smoking and possessing recreational marijuana on property occupied, owned, controlled, or operated by the city. Their ordinance will also make it illegal to smoke or consume marijuana or marijuana products in public in the city. I am asking that with council consensus, we adopt a similar ordinance as soon as possible. I am also aware that the Department of Health Services, and this would be a separate track item, I would like to see an ordinance come forward as soon as possible. The other item, the second item, is the Arizona Department of Health will start accepting applications for new dispensaries this coming January, and that we can expect those licenses to be issued within 60 days. The state, in its great good wisdom, has allowed us to enact reasonable regulations, including limitations on recreational marijuana retail establishments, marijuana testing facilities, and the delivery of recreational marijuana. On a separate track, I would like us to develop some regulations following in that track. So I am actually offering two proposals. One, that we adopt an ordinance similar to Peoria's as soon as possible, and secondly, we look at developing a body of reasonable regulations to deal with recreational marijuana. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Hugh.
Thank you, Mayor. I can be short. I agree with Councilmember Clark. Thank you.
Councilmember Tomchoff.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to clarify, so is Councilmember Clark asking for a workshop to be brought forward for discussion? Or I just want to make sure on all of those items, or?
Clarification, for the ordinance, if we replicate Peoria's, I would like to see that come forward at the next workshop so that we get it on the books as soon as possible. The other item with regard to reasonable regulations of that recreational marijuana industry, I recognize that will take some time and look forward to seeing that at a future workshop presentation.
Thank you, Mayor. And I did have one of my own, if I may. Speaking of the recent election, Glendale voters did not approve the 4 bonds that we had out for their approval. And I myself, anyway, take responsibility for probably not telling a good enough story about what it was we were trying to do. I think we adopted the financial policy that I think was meaningful, but it was late. And I mean, I've never done this before, so I wasn't really sure. But I think we need to tell a better story. But what I'd like to do is for staff to, maybe you're already doing this, put together some sort of a survey to find out what was not appealing to the residents. What did we miss on? To send out a survey so that we understand how to better communicate what it is we're trying to do with residents. I think it'd be important to find out why they didn't pass before we ever tried to do this again. So, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Turner.
Nothing today, Mayor.
Vice Mayor.
I just put a second onto Councilmember Clark's recommendations, and I'd like to add to that we do make sure we include the special item of interest that I had brought forward that has been postponed for several times regarding preschools as being part of that regulation. Thank you.
Okay, and then I'm going to go back to where Councilmember Tomachop was just a second ago. I think people that need to be recognized for doing the best they could, Vicki, and I'm not sure who else was on your team as far as, it probably seemed like hundreds of meetings that you guys attended where not a lot of public showed up, which is unfortunate, but I want to thank you guys for really, truly putting your effort into that. I was asked by the media, what happened, and quite honestly, I feel as though I took the blame for those not passing. One thing about being mayor is you get all the accolades, but you get all the arrows too. I think, and when I say we failed, I mean starting from me. I think we just did not do a good job explaining to our citizens what they were accomplishing. And I'm not saying Vicki, saying that we should have got with our business community, we should have got with the Chamber of Commerce, we should have got with our churches, with everybody that lives in this community, and talked about it and really had people understanding what it was about. Depending strictly upon what Vicki and her group had done, I think we see the error of our ways in that one. So Vicki, that wasn't you. I have no hard feelings towards what you guys did. Thank you for doing everything that you did. But I think as a group, as this entire council, we have to do a better job this next time around. Fortunately, it was early enough where we have that opportunity to come back and fix. But I would ask that all of us get thoroughly engaged and make sure that this thing passes. So with that, can I get a motion to go into executive session?
Second.
I have a motion from Councilmember Aldama, a second from Councilmember Hugh, to go into executive session. Any discussion on a motion? Hearing none, all in favor vote aye.
Aye.
Any opposed vote nay. Appears the ayes have it, do have it. This council meeting is recessed.